Well, Chuck, the last time we tried to do one of these preview shows here in New York City, it was around 3 months ago, and a lot of fans afterwards were kind of complaining about the fact that there wasn't much analysis. There was just a lot of yelling and laughing. Of course, we were mobbed by a slew of Irish fans. So
right.
Ask and you shall receive. This time, you're going to get a traditional preview show. Chuck and I are here in Brooklyn, New York, just outside the world-famous King's Theater. The UFC 208 ceremonial weigh-ins just wrapped up. That means we are mere hours away now from the UFC's long-awaited debut in Brooklyn. They're holding an event tomorrow, in case you didn't hear, at the Barclays Center. It's headlined by Holm versus Germaine de Randamie for the inaugural UFC featherweight title. And Chuck, let's start there, of course. It's a big one. It's their debut here in Brooklyn. It's Holm, who's still a star in my opinion. She still has that rub, but yet it's for this belt, and it's introducing this division that the UFC has been very hesitant about really going all in on. Really, devoting time and effort into signing people. In fact, as we stand here today, they have yet to sign a single other women's featherweight fighter. Does it feel like there's kind of like this weird hollowness to this fight? Like you're not quite sure what to make of it, and that's why it doesn't feel as important as it should?
First of all, where's that sea of drunken Dutchmen? I thought they'd be taking us away like that. But honestly, it was never anything but weird from the moment that they booked this fight, because the obvious absence of Chris Cyborg, Justino not being in here, that just gives it an air of like, well, why bother until you want that person to be in that fight. So it's been an adjustment for me to even wrap my mind around as any kind of true merit. It has like an air of a little bit of a charade going on with this thing. But I'll tell you what, the one thing that both of these ladies have done is really their enthusiasm and just how much an emotional output they've done all week. It's kind of sold me on the idea that, this is just a big opportunity, regardless of its how much merit stands behind it initially. You got to think that the UFC has been fairly good at filling in divisions and getting talent, and you have to trust their process in this. Even though we don't see it, I can't see how they're going to do it. I feel like it's going to be a moonlighting division and all that stuff as we go on. As we go on, but I feel like they both look at it as a good opportunity for them, and that's infectious. In one weird way or another, it's just Holm. I know a lot of people don't think she should be here. The 2 losses in the bantamweight division, but she's very emotional about getting an opportunity to make history, however you want to asterisk it or whatever you want to do with it. And de Randamie has just been a delight to be around, and I feel like she's really seizing the moment too. Maybe it's a little infectious, maybe it's just because I'm around her, but I start to get a little more excited with it as it comes along.
The pro is obviously that the winner of this fight stands to make more money as a UFC champion. So I think anyone likes to see that. Anyone who's a fan of the sport. The weird part for me is, strange title fights have been the flavor du jour over the last few months. This one is actually more bizarre, in my opinion, than interim belts in the featherweight and lightweight division, only because those are kind of like #1 contender titles. This is starting a whole new division. Yeah. Once you crown a champion in this division, you have to kind of defend that belt and start investing time and effort into signing talent and actually cultivating a division. This one is way bigger of a deal, in my opinion, than any of those interim titles, and that's why I'm not quite sure how to feel about it, because they've made no effort to sell us on the fact that they're now invested in the 145ers.
100% correct. I know we were talking about, I think it was on the MMA Beat, we talked about, I made mention that I thought that in weird ways you see a juxtaposition from the UFC and the old Strikeforce or Bellator. Like they're kind of, doing a list, because UFC Strikeforce would put together these bouts that had no future. There was no future stake. It was just a bout that was put together because they wanted to make a fight, and we just let the chips fall where they may. It didn't really matter. It was a one-off. I feel like that's the vibe of this. That's the vibe. And that's very un-UFC like. We're always talking about what's at stake. We're always talking about the future division, who's coming up. We want to hear people call people out on the mic, And this is just one of those rare situations where none of that really is in place. Yeah. It's just so unformed that it's hard to really contemplate what the next move will be, much less, even if, either one will stay up at 145 afterwards. It's just a very different space, and it's awfully weird when the person you created the division for is not the one fighting for it. Sure. I feel like that's really the biggest issue, because if Justino's fighting on this fight, we're probably not thinking it's as strange. We're thinking, well, they finally gave her the division, and now we find challenges.
Of course, a lot of people bring that up. You've been advocating to have a 145. We've talked about it on the beat, but it was solely for her because it was unhealthy for her to fight at 140 or 135. Once she was no longer a part of this scenario, and yes, they did kind of dodge a bullet by her having this issue with USADA. One of these probably would have stepped in had they booked her originally, but it does feel a little strange. Now, I will say this. It's almost a crime that we are focusing on this, and maybe it's on us. Yeah. Maybe it's on me for bringing it up, because this matchup actually makes a lot of sense. This is a very fun styles matchup. Muay Thai champion versus boxing champion Holm with her resume. Durandamy has looked good as of late. If you would have given me Holly Holm versus Jermaine Durandamy as a main event sans title, I would have been all in. I really would have. It's the weird sort of illusion of this new division that clouds it. So let's ignore that for now. Let's talk about the fight. Jermaine Durandamy is actually the betting favorite going into this one. Yeah. Does that surprise you?
That does surprise me, only in the sense that generally when we're talking about a Vegas line, there's a lot of just, they're playing perception, right? They're playing those types of things. And this is one of those situations where you think Holly Holm with that one glaring, huge victory would still have that perception, even through 2016 where she dropped a couple of fights. And Durandamy is just one of those few. She's more of a woodwork, fighter for people who aren't really paying attention in the bubble of what's going on. So I'm a little surprised by that, but I think that, maybe those fairly glaring losses to Holly Holm in 2016 add up. I think she's handled herself really well, and I think that, she'd never had a loss, much less back-to-back losses, and you have to think from a competitor of her standpoint who's been in the fight game for so long, how does she respond to that? And I think in her mind, because of who she is, I think she will respond very well. And so that makes me a little bit like, wow, if I'm betting money on it, I'm taking Holm in this fight. Yeah,
even dating back to her boxing career, I do believe she's never suffered 2 straight losses ever in her combat sports career. Do you feel like this fight can almost, once it's all said and done, be an indictment on her MMA career? Like she needs to win this fight to almost validate the Rousey win. If she loses 3 in a row, then there now becomes this discussion like, was that a fluke? Did she catch Rousey on a bad night? Like losing 3 after that, obviously you can't take anything away from her, what happened in Melbourne at 193, but does she almost have to win this more so than Jermaine to validate that performance?
In a weird way, I want to say yes, but at the same time, we're running with a lot of flukes right now because there's just, Miesha Tate would then become, fluky in her way for losing the way she did, and Ronda Rousey is a fluke for, what I mean? I just feel like there was parity that got into this division, and suddenly, one person had another person dialed in, and it's just leapfrog. But I do know what you're saying, because for Holly Holm especially, after coming off of that, and that's it's like I mentioned somewhere that it's like she stole her mojo. She was able to kind of become an instantaneous star, bigger than she was because she was in the fight game bubble, but she's became a star. I thought, not maybe to Ronda's level, but a star big enough to sell a card like this. Obviously, it's just it's so weird how fast those things move. Like you have a finger on the needle.
This time last year, she's still the champion.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I just for her. It's for her. I just think that she just has to do what she's been doing, And she's the one great thing about her. She's always been a consummate professional. I actually enjoy seeing her in fight week just because she's so calm. It's bizarre. It's like that whole Ronda Rousey build-up was bizarre, and she's like that again. It's
funny though how narratives can change in the media, because she wins this fight, she becomes just the 4th person in UFC history to be a champion in 2 different weight classes, and then all of a sudden you say, well, maybe she just kind of, slipped against Miesha. She was winning that fight, and maybe then she had a bad night against Valentina. But if she loses 3 in a row, it becomes 3 in a row, and she's a fluke. I think that she really needs to have a nice performance on Saturday night, not to validate it, but maybe to shut up all those critics. Now, a couple of predictions from you. A, who wins the fight and how?
I'm going to go with Holly Holm. I don't know. I have a hard time seeing exactly how it plays out. So I'm going to say that she'll take over the course of the fight and win a decision.
Okay.
The great thing about this is I feel like both of them are very capable of ending each other's nights very quickly, but I'm not sure. I kind of talked to them about that in the build-up, and I didn't really feel like there was some excitement to accommodating each other, but there was also a little bit, especially from Durandamy, I was like, I'm not gonna, you know what I mean? You can see something like I'm not gonna be stupid in there, that sort of thing. So if they're playing it a little smarter, I think it goes the distance. Holly Holm.
So let's say Holly Holm wins, and you're right. Is her next fight against Chris Cyborg?
Well, as long as they can, right? That's the obvious fight to make. I think you have to get Cyborg involved as soon as she possibly can, because everything is validated at that point. The 145 division makes sense. We're all, with the things you were talking about earlier, we're all going to be behind it 100%. And you know, it'll just become fun, because at that point you have the kingpin in place, and then anybody who wants to come challenger can, or anybody who wants to earn that shot. And to me, that's the fun part of the 145 division.
What's
so
the
they gotta get that.
female version of kingpin? Is it queen pin?
Queen pin.
Is it?
Yeah, that sounded funny coming out. Queen pin then. Queen
all right, there you go. All right. So there you have it. That's the main event. The co-main event, if you will, is the return of Anderson Silva, who all of a sudden hasn't won since UFC 153, if we're not going to count the Nick Diaz fight as a victory because it was overturned due to the failed drug test. And he's fighting Derek Brunson. And how about this? I just learned this today. I don't follow these things like some of you degenerates out there. Derek Brunson is the favorite going into this fight. Does that surprise you?
That does. But less so. I don't know. It's kind of weird when you start to think about that one because of that fact. I think Anderson Silva has more to prove, as crazy as that sounds, in his fight, because he hasn't won, like you said, cleanly, I guess, in several years. And but it's also funny because you were just mentioning how Holm, you could skew it another way and say, well, you know, he was winning the one. Well, you could look at it that way too. You know, it's like he was beating Michael Bisping, and he probably should have won that fight. Yep. And, you know, he took the Daniel Cormier fight on 2 days' notice. Really, the only guy who's completely had his number that you think he had full camps for was Chris Weidman.
Yep.
So
it's amazing how things can change, right?
So it's like, it just depends on how you want to look at it. But I guess I see that as a coin flip. To me, that's a money line type of fight. I don't really pay attention to the lines either, but to me, that's how it seems. I don't know. It's just watching Anderson Silva for so long, you got to think that some of that magic, some of that mojo still exists for him, and he's going to be able to execute what he wants to do in there. And let's face it, Brunson fights a little wild and he keeps his chin open for business. So there's a good chance. That's
exactly why I feel like Anderson should be the favorite. Of course, Brunson's background is wrestling. If he tries to wrestle Anderson, that's always been his kryptonite. But if he fights him, and you'd think he'd not want to do this, but if he does do it like he did against Robert Whittaker, Anderson Silva is the master at that kind of counterattack, right? I mean, he's just leaving himself open. So I guess maybe we should view it as more of a, of a pick-em. I was surprised, though, as of right now, that Brunson is the favorite. So who is your pick at the end of the day?
I lean Brunson, only in the sense that, you know, when you look at it, the two trajectories, and you see a guy who's had 4 knockouts in his last 5 wins, and he got knocked out, and he's coming off that knockout, which is a weird thing to think about, but I don't think he's affected like some people might be. You think, who's going to be hungrier coming into this? And Anderson Silva has got a lot. He's had so much of a run. You're not sure exactly what he's chasing at this point, but I feel like for Brunson, it's a big spotlight moment, the biggest fight of his career, and he realizes that. So I just feel like he's gonna give his best effort.
Over the course of Anderson Silva's UFC career, he was always fighting the creme de la creme. So that means he's fighting guys who are coming off of wins. How does Derek Brunson react to coming off of a vicious knockout against a guy like Anderson Silva? You wonder if he's a little gun shy. You wonder if he then really resorts back to the wrestling and tries to go to his bread and butter, because this is a unique scenario as far as the matchup is concerned.
It's such a, like, to take this fight knowing that you're like, well, I can beat him wrestling. It's counterintuitive. You know, if you get this type of platform, you don't have a big name and you're trying to make that name, you want people to see the power in your hands, I don't think you should wrestle him. I know what you're saying. Maybe you sprinkle some of that in and make sure you get the cage control and all that, but I think he's going to have to let his hands go if he wants to make good movement on this. If you just beat Anderson Silva in a wrestling match, I'm not sure what that gains you.
If Anderson wins, and impressively, do you give him the title shot against Bisping at the risk of pissing off Yoel Romero?
Wow. Gosh, you know, it's funny because I hadn't really contemplated that. In my mind, I was like, well, Anderson Silva's light years from ever having a... But that's absolutely true. They have this great first fight. If he wins emphatically, you could have that rematch. In today's UFC, that makes as much sense as anything else. I don't really feel like they're catering to people's feelings in the merit sense, so I feel like that's as likely as anything. And I mean, in the typical sense, I'm like, Yoel Romero has deserved that shot, but we've seen a lot of strange things. And I can tell you one thing, Michael Bisping would probably welcome that fight ahead of him too. So
absolutely. Okay, let's stick with the middleweight division. Jacare Souza is fighting Tim Boetsch, and we learned an interesting new wrinkle to this fight this week, and that is that Tim Boetsch is on the last fight of his contract, and he likes this scenario. He thinks, hey, I beat Jacare, I have all the leverage in the world. Could you imagine him pulling off that upset? He's a 4-1 underdog. He's taking the fight against Jacare. Kind of makes a little more sense now, or do you think it's a stupid move? You go into, if you get smoked, there's really no incentive to sign you anymore. So how do you feel about his decision to take this fight on the last fight of his deal?
In a strange way, I think it makes sense because, you know, he's kind of traded wins-loss. I think he's had more losses than wins of late, and I just feel like...
But he is on a bit of a winning streak, I believe,
he's won
2 in a row.
And he's looked very good in those. And so, like, if he's able to add that one big piece to that, then it becomes a big payday for him. And if he loses... I hate calling anybody like him because he's beat some really good names, but you know, he's had kind of a journeyman career. He's went from, you know, weight classes and stuff. I just feel like he's had a journeyman. I feel like if you're going to gamble, you should gamble like this. Okay. Honestly, like it's one of those situations. Like I'm not sure how, you know, what the ceiling is for Tim Boetsch. I'm not sure, but if he's able to do this, maybe he puts himself. He's an older guy too. It's not like he's coming up. So maybe he just wants to get one last good contract, and this is his best in his mind. You know, why not roll the dice and see if he can get it this way?
The fans were not happy with this matchup, but Jacare is. He just wants to fight. He wants to get paid at this point, remain active. His last fight was back in May. He was supposed to fight in November against Luke Rockhold. Do you see any scenario in which Boetsch can catch him, or do you think this is a Jacare fight to lose, so to speak?
I don't see the scenario, but I will say this. Tim Boetsch, there's been at least 3 times I've completely thought he had no chance in a fight, and he won those fights. So going back to the Hector Lombard coming in, I thought he was just being fed to Lombard in that fight, and he just turns into a guy who's going to, you know, toil through a win. And you just never know if you're going to get that version. I doubt it, especially in the contract fight. But he's capable of that. He's capable of making it an ugly win. And then the Yushin Okami fight, when he just chopped him down, I remember that was supposed to be Yushin Okami in Japan. I mean, I feel like he shows up in weird times. The Natal fight was another one where he showed up. I don't see it happening here, though, because Jacare is just so good all over, and he's a very smart fighter. I just don't feel like he gets into gunfights. He's not going to stand and chin check with a guy like that. He's going to be very smart in how he handles the fight. And we've seen him in similar situations with guys like Chris Camozzi where, you know, you're like, you have everything to lose, and he handles himself very well. So I expect to see that version of Jacare in there.
Glover Teixeira is fighting Jared Cannonier, the relatively unknown Jared Cannonier. Teixeira is coming off that really bad loss to Rumble Johnson, knocked out in a matter of seconds. This is interesting matchmaking from the UFC. They don't usually do this, but they need new blood at 205. Do you like the fight, or does it not make any sense to you at all?
Well, I like it in the sense of what you're saying, and that's almost kind of the theme going on here. Is like there's opportunity from some sector of every fight here, and I like it for the, you know, in that sense because, you know, they do need new guys coming up, and that 205 division particularly is full of past glories and icons, guys who are very good, but they're getting up in age, are no longer what you consider in their prime. And I think Glover's one of those guys, although he's not quite there. Like he could still be. You know, he could still be that guy, but he's, you know, his last loss was a pretty bad one. And you're just not sure. And at some point, I don't know if they're kind of, I hate the word gatekeeper. I don't like those type of things, but it's almost...
Litmus test. I like litmus test.
Litmus test is good. I like something like that because I feel like if you're going to give it, like, it's kind of a good match. So what are you going to put Glover Teixeira against truly? And you might as well have this kind of thing where either reestablishes some momentum or you get a new guy basically coming up.
So who do you got?
That's a tough. You know, just watching those guys square off, I was looking at Glover Teixeira and just his demeanor and everything, and something's telling me he's going to get back on the right track on this one.
A lot bigger too. Cannonier was talking about going down to 185 after his win in December.
He says he was just fat. That's so funny.
Okay, and then before we go, Dustin Poirier, Jim Miller. That kicks off things on pay-per-view. Your pick?
Man, I'm going to go Dustin Poirier, but man, Jim Miller, what a great story he's been to be able to, you know, contemplate retirement, wants to retire at UFC 200, is able to rattle off these wins, turn it around again. He's done this before where he's had some situations when all of a sudden he comes back, he has the Lyme disease, he's put that under control. It's a good story, but I feel like Dustin Poirier's never lost 2 fights in a row. He's that guy, I think, who really wires back in. He's been pending in this next big thing, but in pending because he wins 4, he loses 1, he wins 4, and I feel like right now he's going to dial in and get rolling the right way. That's just a good feeling on it, but I think that Jim Miller's a perfect first guy to get that rolling with.
All right, there you have it. We're out of time. Look out for the Jared Brooks-Ian McCall fight. I mean, significant only because it appears, at least for right now, that Ian McCall is actually going to get a fight. He's had horrible luck over the last 2 years. Right now, it seems like it's on. And Jared Brooks, holy moly, he's like the reincarnation of John Dodson, maybe even a little shorter than him, but perhaps has more energy than Dodson. He's been kind of a revelation this week as well. I will say this about UFC 208. I know it has been much maligned, I know it has been criticized, and I hear your criticisms, but if you look at every fight on this card, there's a story there. There's something to grab onto. There's something of interest. There are names. It does feel cobbled together, yes, but I actually feel like it's a pretty deep pay-per-view. And how about this little factoid? We've got the real Anderson Silva, the female Anderson Silva, Germaine de Randamie, and the next Anderson Silva kicking it off, Brooklyn's own Phil Nover. You can't beat that. History will be made at UFC 208 Saturday night at the Barclays Center. We're out of time. My hands are freezing. My face is freezing. I can't feel my ears or my cheeks. For Chuck Mindenhall, I'm Ariel Helwani. For the rest of our crew here in Brooklyn, thank you for watching our coverage all week long. We'll see you Saturday night after the fights.